I'm going to take a look at knitted and cable cast-ons today, and we're going to begin with the two kinds of slipknot. Most people aren't really aware that there are two possible kinds of slipknot. So here's my tail, and this leads to the ball of yarn. I usually make my slipknots like this, where I flip the yarn leading to the ball over the top of the tail yarn. And then I take the yarn that's running over the top and pop it up through the loop. So it's just twisted up there, and pull up that loop and you have a slipknot. What's significant about this slipknot is that it's adjustable from the ball end. Here's your tail. I can pull on the tail and all it does is tighten that knot around here, but this one is adjustable from the ball end of the yarn. Now let's look at the other type of slipknot. I flipped it over in the same direction, but this time I'm going to take my tail yarn from underneath and tuck it through the loop. So it's my tail yarn that's being pushed through the loop. And if I snuggle this one up, I've got to be careful to make sure my tail doesn't pull through, so you have to keep control of it. But this time, this slipknot will gather from the tail end. And that is actually quite useful when we're doing knitted and cable cast-on. So generally I begin these cast-ons with a tail tightening slipknot. Here's my tail tightening slipknot, and I'm going to pop that onto my knitting needle. And I'm going to snuggle it up with the tail, but that doesn't matter. We can adjust that later. Knitted cast-on is one of the standard group of cast-ons that one should really know. It's a very useful cast-on. It's not one I use a great deal, but there are occasions when it comes in handy. So we have our first stitch on the needle, and we tuck our second needle through the stitch and just throw the yarn around the needle. And this is anti-clockwise if you view it from the needle tip. So if I can tip that up there, the yarn is going around the needle anti-clockwise when viewed from the tip. And now I just knit that through. And this is one of the reasons this is a good cast-on to teach new knitters, because it mimics the knitting action and there's nothing really new to learn. We're only dealing with one yarn. We're throwing the yarn around the needle anti-clockwise when viewed from the tip, and then you knit the new stitch through, so you're reinforcing the knitting action. The next stage is, how do we put this on the needle? Some people put it on the needle tip to tip, but I'd much prefer to come in from underneath, and it puts just a very slight twist in that lower chain. And it means that your needle is actually in position for the next stitch. Let's look at the difference between the two. So around the needle as if to knit the stitch through and tuck it on that needle. Then I have to take my needle out again in order to put it into the stitch to do it again. So if we just pass it across like this, it slows things down quite considerably. So let's go to the lowering that left needle tip and going from underneath towards the tip, and that way my needle is in position for my next stitch, so I can be much more speedy and efficient. And as you see, I didn't keep control of my yarn there, and my stitch got quite large, so you have to be prepared just to keep gentle control over your yarn, otherwise these stitches can vary quite a lot in size. And this of course can be done with left hand yarn operation. And back onto the needle and knit. Make sure we get the new stitch up to the fullness of the needle. And the inserting of the right needle into the stitch does stretch it out a little, so you have to be careful how stretched it becomes. And if you spread them out on your needle, you can see how even you've been. Now on the next row, I'm going to work my next row with a contrasting colour so we can see what this cast on edge really looks like. If we were to pull this off the needle right now, what we've actually got is a crochet chain. Kind of strange looking one, but that's what it is. It's a crochet chain, and we had the side of the chain on the needle. So this is not the same as a provisional cast on, but we used the side of a crochet chain along the needle. This is what the knitted cast on looks like when you're finished, and one of the very telltale signs that it is a knitted cast on is this rather loose lower edge. Some people consider it to be lacy and use it as a start for lacy pieces because it does give you very clear places to knit up stitches, but it won't look invisible. So that's the first side and that's the second side. And it's a good practice to be able to look at an edge and say, that was knitted cast on, that was cable cast on, that was long tail. So take a good look at what you're actually creating. I just changed colour at the end of the cast on. This is not a provisional edge. This would be quite difficult to remove. You'd have to cut it out. One of the things that's worth knowing about this edge is that if you drop a stitch and it ladders back and goes all the way to the edge, just pull that out of there. So we've had a complete ladder back to the edge. You actually still have a complete edge at the bottom. So if I wished to recreate this, I can go into that side of the crochet chain. Don't miss out that first rung, it's very low down, and take the rungs in order and rebuild that stitch column. We'll have a look at cable cast on later, and that's not an option with the cable cast on. Another one of the uses of knitted cast on is to be able to extend the row. So if, for example, I had a row with 10 stitches and I needed to add 3 more stitches to the edge, I can do that by knitted cast on, which is something we couldn't do that with long tail cast on. So it's a useful method for when you want to extend an already existing row of stitches. Just to have a look at the first stitch we cast on, we don't actually have too much of a baggy hole there because we used that tail adjustable slip knot. There is no hole at that end, and if there were, I can just pull on that tail and adjust it the way I'd like it. Here, on the other hand, is the other kind of slip knot being used, and it's very, very common to get quite a baggy stitch at the start of that cast on, and because this is not a tail adjustable slip knot, I can't tighten that baggy loop up. So this is knitted cast on again, but with the non-tail adjustable slip knot to begin.